Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Today's guest is Ben Smith. He's a financial advisor and is heading up the sporting department at FLM Wealth Management. Ben has over 10 years of experience as a financial advisor, and on this episode, he will share his knowledge on investing. Should you invest in crypto? Is real estate still a good investment? Is it okay for athletes to treat themselves an expensive car after their first big deal? Let's find out. We are back with another episode. It's number 45, and today's guest is Ben Smith. He's a partner at FLM Wealth Management, where he's heading up the sporting department. So Ben Smith, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you, Marcus. It's great to be here. Sorry if I sound a little bit snuffly throughout. I have got a little bit of a cold, but soldiering on through from home as opposed to being in the office.
I'm very glad that you're taking the time to talk with me today. And so you are working with wealth management, and in the sporting department, you are advising athletes on how to invest their money. So can you just give a little bit of an overview of what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in simple terms, what we do is we help people make great decisions with their money. And when it comes to your money, there are so many different elements that feed into that. So there's the tax you pay each time you earn money. There's the tax you pay when you invest money. There's the tax you pay when you draw income in the future. There's what you actually invest in. So do you put your money into stocks, property, gold, under the mattress? There's lots of different options there. And then there's more of the behavioral side. And I think the behavioral side is often where the most value is added. So making sure that someone is doing the right things at the right time, not making mistakes. So not cashing in investments when Russia invades Ukraine and the markets wobble. All those sorts of things all lead into the client-advisor relationship. And really, it's one of those relationships where we always say we want to be the first person they call when anything changes in their life. So if they have a kid, if they're about to move to a different club, whatever it might be, we want to be someone that's there to help them understand the financial side of that.
There's so much to talk about on this topic. But what I found, first of all, very interesting is you are advising athletes, and usually athletes retire in their late 30s, depending a little bit on what sport they are doing, which is obviously not the case for a regular worker who usually retires around 65. So if you're advising someone outside of sports, they are in their 30s, maybe you say, okay, you can take a little bit more risks. You have more years until your retirement. How does it differ for an athlete whose retirement comes much earlier?
Well, it's one of the biggest problems that athletes face. And the simple answer is you need to make some really great decisions as soon as possible. So if you think about someone who works in a traditional career, they might start working when they're 20, 22, depending on whether they went to college or university. And they're probably, as you said, going to work until they're 65. And what tends to happen in that scenario is that people spend their money when they're young, and they don't earn as much. As their earnings go up, they start to become more sensible. There is a sense of their own mortality and retirement, and often people save more as they go through their career. So footballers or athletes in general don't really have that option or that luxury. They need to make decisions from as soon as they start earning. And for a lot of these guys, it's 16, 17, 18. They get their first academy contracts. And if they, don't get a move on and only start investing when maybe they're 25, 26, then often it's too late. So the biggest message you can give to an athlete is get into some really good habits early on. So start investing regularly each time you get paid. Make sure a good chunk of that money goes towards saving for your future. And how much money that needs to be depends on spending habits and when you're going to retire and all those sorts of things. So again, that's what a good financial planner should help them work out. And then you mentioned risk. It is about obviously taking an appropriate level of risk. 15 years, if you take that as an average sporting career, it's not a particularly long career to invest over. We call that sort of medium to long-term investing. So again, it will vary depending on the individual. But when it comes to risk, really someone in that position should be taking a good level of risk, but I always talk about sensible risk versus stupidity risk, which is where, you might invest all of your money into one cryptocurrency or one single share, compared with a higher risk balanced portfolio where you're invested into lots of shares from around the world, lots of different other asset classes. So it is different for everyone, but I think everyone needs to have a plan and really a projection as to how they're going to get to that retirement age in a good shape.
Yeah, you mentioned investment and you also mentioned crypto here. So nowadays there are different ways to invest. You have stocks, you have bonds, you have cryptocurrency, NFTs is coming up. How are you advising with regards to the different types of investment?
Yeah, when it comes to investing, the old rules all still apply. So if you've read any old investment book by Warren Buffett or Benjamin Graham or whoever it might be, those rules still apply. And one of the overused terms in our industry, which we've all heard a million times, is diversification and not having all your eggs in one basket. And that's absolutely what someone needs to do, because no one can predict what the best investment's going to be next year. If you look last year, one of the best investments last year was actually investing into coffee. This year, one of the best investments has been gold because of the invasion of Ukraine and stock markets being quite worried about that. So no one has a crystal ball. No one knows what's going to happen next. When it comes to these more niche investments, so you mentioned crypto and NFTs, there's a couple of things really. One is that none of that is regulated yet. So no advisor is authorized in the UK to advise people to invest into certain cryptocurrencies. So if anyone is going to invest into those sorts of things, they need to understand the risks and they need to understand the scope of or the state of that landscape. So I always say when it comes to something as new as crypto or NFTs, there's a few things. It's unregulated. It's a bit like the Wild West. There's lots of scams out there. We've seen lots of fake coins be issued and people running off with people's money. But there is always opportunity when it's at the early stages of any investment. So things like crypto are definitely the future. The blockchain technology is something which could be widely adopted into many different areas of the economy. So it's important to, if you are going to invest in those areas, to do a little bit, but don't make it your whole nest egg. Make it a satellite strategy. Have your core wealth invested into other asset classes, more traditional asset classes like property, bonds, stocks, gold, all these sorts of things that have been around for years.
That's interesting. And some athletes are also nowadays getting paid in Bitcoin. Is that something also that you're advising them on? In what currency they are getting paid? Because, for example, now Russia invading Ukraine, the ruble obviously has dropped a lot. KHL, the Continental Hockey League, a lot of players are there. Are you advising them to getting paid in dollars when they're abroad? How are you thinking there?
Yeah, well, look, none of our clients are being paid in cryptocurrency at the moment. The majority of our clients are UK based. So fortunately, the UK has had a fairly stable currency, obviously, for a number of years. So most of them are getting paid in fiat currency and in sterling. So I think for the time being, that will remain the case. Obviously, cryptocurrencies do give you a certain advantage, particularly as we're seeing, you wouldn't want to be paid in ruble right now, as you alluded to. So there are some advantages to that. I think in the UK or the US, we're still a bit of a way off from that. I think there would need to be some wider adoption from governments, wider adoption by organizations before that really becomes something that's liable. But what I would say on cryptocurrency is we present to youth academies in various different sports on all things money education. So we'd go in and we'd talk to 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old athletes. And one of the first questions we always get asked when we finish our presentations or topics that we're talking about is, what about cryptocurrencies and NFTs? So it's very much on the lips of everyone. It's very much on social media. If you go on TikTok, there's a million advertisements for investing in crypto. And it's like these things have been around forever in terms of get rich quick schemes. And everyone always talks about the person they know that invested £1,000 and it's now worth £1 million. You'll always hear someone that tells you a similar story What you don't hear is all the stories where it's gone wrong. So again, people just need to be educated. People need to know the risks, and they need to know that it's a part of a balanced investment portfolio. And again, if you're going to invest in crypto, don't just invest in one niche coin that might have been started in some weird and wonderful part of the world. Make sure you spread your risk across lots of cryptocurrencies, and make sure you're investing in the big ones that have a bit more of a track record.
Yeah, and that's where you guys come in, obviously, with advising on that.
I think that if it sounds too good to be true, it is. It's still often a good sense check to have when you're investing, because we've seen loads of scams down the years where an investment is advertised as a 10% guaranteed return. No one can guarantee a 10% return in the current climate, because interest rate, particularly in the Western world where interest rates are very low, there's just no such thing as a 10% guaranteed return. So I think having a bit of a sense, making sure you know when something doesn't sound right, and seeking advice from a few different people is really important for these athletes.
For sure. There are so many people now, I mean, that they swear by the Bitcoin, but maybe it's what you say, if it's too good to be true, it might be so.
Well, I don't argue the fact that lots of cryptocurrencies will be used long into the future, and that some of the technology is amazing. If you hold certain cryptocurrencies for a long time, you will do really, really well. I think the days or the time where a lot of the main coins have gone up 1,000%, 2,000% in a year, we might have already missed that. It might have already been widely adopted enough that we're not going to see such crazy returns. But it goes back to that point. It should be balanced. It should be part of the portfolio, because if you just go and invest into crypto and things don't work out, then you can't live in your cryptocurrency. So make sure you buy your house, make sure you invest into other things that will support you as well.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, obviously, if we're talking about the regular stock market, it took a big hit here lately with everything that's going on in the world. Is now a time where you advise your clients to invest because it's a low market?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously that's one of the oldest sayings in the book. Warren Buffett very famously said, "Be brave when others are fearful." But it's not that easy. And what has happened this year is certain stock markets have dropped fairly considerably. So the US market at one point, the NASDAQ, for example, the tech space was down about 20%. It's bounced back quite considerably since then. And a lot of the major markets are down sort of 4, 5, 6%, something like that year to date now. But it is a time where there is value. And if you think about, if you were buying a product, so if you were looking to buy a new pair of shoes and suddenly they were 25% discount, you'd buy, right? It makes sense. But when it's a stock market, it's not that easy, because if it's 25% down, you're reading the press that says, World War III is about to start, and a bomb's gone off near a NATO country, and is this going to be, the start of things to come? So it's easier said than done that. And the other comparison I always use at the moment is back to the COVID pandemic, because everyone remembers that. It's recent memory. And in March 2020, certain stock markets were down 30, 35%. And people were fighting for toilet roll and other goods in supermarkets. And if you're an advisor at that point saying to people, invest your money now, it's very difficult for clients to do that, because they say, well, look, is this the end of the world? Are we going to be, are we all going to be dead in 5 years' time because of this virus? There's so much uncertainty. So absolutely, history has always proven that you should invest when stock markets dip, but actually doing it is much more difficult emotionally.
So if I have this pile of money here next to me, where do I put it now?
So again, it does go back to how long for. I think that's the first test you always need to ask yourself. If you're trying to make a quick buck and it's for a house in a year's time, then honestly, it's going to be difficult to make a steady return over that time, and you could lose money. But if I take a typical scenario, so let's say you've got a pot of money and you're an athlete and you're 20 years old and you're going to retire in 15 years' time. What we would then do is, let's say you're a medium to upper risk investor, and we've gone through a normal risk exercise. What we do in that scenario is we would invest you across a number of different asset classes. So Stocks would make up a good proportion of that, probably 60% of the portfolio at least. So that would be stocks from all over the world, whether it's the US, Asia, Europe, a good spread, maybe some emerging markets in there as well. Then you'd invest into things like bonds, maybe some gold funds if you're a bit more cautious. But commercial property funds also often makes up portfolios. So it's all about spreading that risk. And then it's a case of monitoring that on an ongoing basis, making sure it still fits your own scenario and what's going on in the wider world. And the other thing I would say is that the other part of that is your own property that you live in, because obviously most people, particularly in the UK, tend to buy a property. You're going to want to pay off that mortgage by the time you get to stop in playing. So again, that all needs to be built into the plan. Then there's things like kids that come along, which also you might need to save some money for things like education. So there's a million different reasons why you could invest. And that's why I'm always stressed that every plan is different.
You brought up an interesting point there. What are some aspects that are common in athletes' career that happens in their lives that might affect how they invest?
Yeah, I think the most difficult thing with athletes is the uncertainty, because if, again, let's take someone who plays rugby or plays football, for example. They have a contract with a club which might last 5 years, 6 years if they're lucky. Now, after that contract, who knows what happens next? So it's all very well me saying they're 20 years old, they're going to play until they're 35, but they might not. So you really need to plan around that contract. And some of the biggest mistakes you see people make is they have 1 year left on their contract. They take out a huge car lease. They've got a high mortgage and they get to the end of that contract and they don't get a new one. So those are the sorts of things that athletes often don't plan for and are difficult to plan for, because I think when you start playing in any sport, you feel like you're invincible and you feel like it will go on forever. The other element, which is really, again, very important to plan for, is things like injuries. So you might have heard of career-ending insurance. That's very popular in a lot of sports. If you ever were injured in football and you broke your leg, for example, and you can never play again, having an insurance policy that pays out a few million quid, which covers, obviously ongoing earnings, is extremely helpful. So players need to protect against those unlikely scenarios, but those ones that could have a sort of disastrous effect on their finances.
I have read that you have worked with some clients like QPR, Crystal Palace, Chelsea Women. Can you tell us some stories from there?
Yeah, so the work we do with clubs is purely educational. So we have a 4 to 6 part money education program. And the idea behind that is that we want all athletes to at least have basic financial knowledge by the time they're starting to sign their main contracts. And the reason that we think that's so important is, I mentioned earlier that you need to make really good decisions from a really young age. It's very difficult to do that if you don't have the knowledge around how short your career is, how long you've got to invest, what you could invest in, what the tax structures look like. So we build that up from a sort of presentation one, where it's telling them some stories, getting them engaged, using some fun apps to answer some quiz questions they go through. Obviously, all athletes are very competitive, so it's good to get them actually contributing to the sessions and competing in them. And then the sessions start off light, but they go all the way through to how you can invest tax efficiently, how you can invest in shares, properties, bonds, gold, all those things that I've mentioned, and how you can ultimately set up good habits to become financially free. So we always talk about gaining financial freedom. And what we mean by that is knowing that when you do stop competing or playing, that you have enough assets to continue to live and sustain your quality of life. And that's not easy. That requires a lot of commitment. It requires giving up buying, all those pairs of trainers and all those fancy cars, or not buying as many as them, depending on how much you earn. And it requires discipline. So one of the first things we always say to any athlete is, we can sit here and tell you how to become wealthy and tell you all the things you need to do, but you are the decision maker. So you're the only one that's going to dictate or decide whether you're successful with your money, which is why education is really important to help them make those good decisions.
This episode is sponsored by InSport Education, the online business school for sport. They offer a range of different courses, for example, Foundations of Sport Business, Private Equity in Sport, and much, much more. As a listener to this podcast, you get 10% off all of their courses using the code Sports Management Podcast 10. Click the link in the description below and sign up today. If we talk a little bit about you and your career, so you are the head of the sporting department and a partner at FLM. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career in sports?
Yeah, so I've been doing this for the last 11 years. I graduated from university back in early 2011 and joined up with FLM pretty quickly. I worked in sport throughout my degree and worked in sports marketing and the sports industry. And I've always played lots of different sports, from football to golf and a lot of running as well during my younger years. So sport always felt like a natural path, but it wasn't where I started. I started by advising people in the City of London, so the financial district, and advising people that worked at big investment banks and law firms and business owners, which was a really good way to learn, because if you're sitting in front of someone who is a fund manager, for example, and talking about their wealth and their money, they've obviously already got quite a good amount of knowledge. So you need to really be at the top of your game to be advising those clients. And it was probably about 5 years ago that we started to move into the sports and entertainment space. And what we've learned over those years is that the education is not necessarily there at a lot of clubs. And again, this isn't anyone's fault. I think it's just a case of the fact that incomes and wealth in sport has shot up so quickly, and a lot of the services around the game have not necessarily kept up. So we noticed there was a bit of a gap. We noticed that, I'm in my mid-30s and we have quite a young, dynamic firm that use lots of technology to bring things like money to life. We noticed that was quite in demand, and the fact that not a lot of people were doing it. And it's been going really well. It's been great to work with some young athletes, some older athletes, and really help them start to plan and hopefully get to that financial freedom. So it's definitely something we're passionate about. I've got a team of us here. There's got about eight or nine of us that do it now. And yeah, we're really enjoying the task of trying to turn a bit of the tide when it comes to athletes and their finances, because as we all know, there's been lots of stories in the past where people sadly maybe haven't been successful with their money. And again, that's not necessarily anyone's fault. We don't learn these things at school. It's much easier to go out and spend your money than it is to decide to invest it into a portfolio of stocks or do some sensible things. So yeah, we're really passionate about it. And I think with the ongoing education and just raising awareness and getting people talking, it's definitely possible to make some real difference out there.
The lack of information among the athletes on the topic of investment, do you think it's because many athletes maybe give up on their education to pursue the sporting career? Maybe they don't go through university, they just go through the primary school, and then they focus all of their energy on the sport, and maybe they are losing out on some of that knowledge?
Yeah, well, I can't comment for a lot of the world, but certainly having grown up in the UK and been educated in the UK, we were never taught any of this at school, even, through to university, where I studied business and economics at university. And yes, I learned quite a few lessons on the world of business and companies and shares and some of those things. But I didn't really learn about personal finance or how you invest in a pension or how you plan to, ultimately gain financial freedom. So as far as I'm aware, in the UK, no one really learns that, even if they go all the way through to university. So I think that is something that is starting to change. I mean, we've done a lot of work with schools over the years as well, and companies to educate pupils and people that are just starting out in the workforce. So there is some good stuff happening, and some of the big banks now are starting to do more in terms of money education. So I don't really think it's just just a sporting thing. I think it's a society thing, certainly in the UK. And I think, it's definitely magnified by the fact that these young athletes need to and have to do really sensible things from a young age. I always go on about it, but if you work until you're 65, when you're 50, it tends to be that we're much more sensible than we were when we were 20 years old. And maybe we're not as materialistic as we were at that age, or we don't spend as money as flippantly. So I do think it's a really tough thing for these athletes. And there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure around spending. Whenever we go into a football club, for example, there's a lot of designer wash bags. There's obviously a lot of nice cars in the car park, and there's a culture of spending. So it's very difficult to not get caught up in that. And again, the way we can change it is education from a young age and good habits. So if you meet a player and he's 18 years old, and let's say he's just signed a contract to earn £1,000 a week in football, if you get that individual to start saving 500 quid a month from that age, then when they get their big contract, so they start earning 20 grand a week or whatever it might be, it's very easy to then say, let's take that 500 quid a month that you're saving and make it 5 grand a month, really up things, because they're already in that habit. Whereas if all they've ever done is earn more, spend more, we refer to it as a lifestyle creep. It's a terminology that people may have heard, and you can go away and Google it. But a lifestyle creep is where you fall into that hamster wheel, and each time you earn more, you spend more. So if we can almost stop that at the start and get them some understanding, get them into some good habits, I think that's the best way to ensure they become successful with their money.
If someone is listening now and they think that this sounds really interesting, I also want to do what Ben is doing, what would be your best advice for them?
So in terms of becoming a financial advisor, financial planner?
Yes, exactly.
So I think the one thing I would say is that higher education and having a degree, it's not essential. So we have ex-athletes that work with us. So we have a guy who started with us last year. He's an ex-rugby player, still plays semi-professionally. We've got semi-professional runners. We've got people that used to play football. So we've got people from all different sporting backgrounds, and many of those individuals don't have degrees. I think what I would say is having a enjoyment of dealing with people is really important, and you need to know how to listen. Obviously, I've spoken a lot today, but I always say that in client meetings, I would like to be talking much less than the client that I'm dealing with, because we need to understand them to really make good solutions for them. So you need to be a good listener. You need to get on with people. I think you need to have emotional intelligence. You need to be able to understand the individual sitting in front of you. You need to be able to ask them really great searching questions and get them to think. And you need to have some interest in the world of finance. So if, the thought of dealing with stock markets and understanding economics doesn't interest you in the slightest, then I think it will be a struggle. But there's lots of ways in which you can get into the industry now. There's good qualifications in the UK. There's the diploma in financial planning and the chartered qualification as well, which you can go on to do. Most countries have something similar now. And most firms, including us here at FLM, offer an apprenticeship or academy type system where you would join a firm, you would learn alongside someone like myself for probably 2 to 4 years, depending on your background. And then you would be in a position where you'd have some clients to deal with, and you start to build your own clients as well. So it's a growing industry. It's one which I think is not going away, and money is certainly not getting simpler. So I think anyone that's interested should certainly look at pursuing it.
Looking back at your own career, has there been any bumps on the road? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, good question. I think the biggest bumps that we have to deal with are legislation changes. So legislation changes at least sort of once or twice a year in the UK, and often in other parts of the world, it will change annually. So what I mean by that is tax rules might change, and that then affects what someone might want to do. So that's a big hurdle that we have to sort of deal with every year. Stock markets, property markets, all those sorts of things. When there are crashes like we've seen at the start of this year, it's a tough time. Clients' investments will be going down during that time, and you need to be there. You need to be updating them. You need to be on the phone, explaining why this is happening, settling clients down. So they're probably the biggest challenges that we deal with. Fortunately, most clients tend to follow advice and stick to it. But I think there are scenarios where clients don't. And I know other advisors who have seen clients, end up not listening to advice and ended up bankrupt or ended up having invested in some things that didn't go well. So there are, I think, that's always really tough to see. And it's tough to see people who have earned lots of money, but haven't done anything sensible with it and end up having to take big pay cuts when they finish playing. So, yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate. I haven't seen too much of that, and hopefully, long may that continue. But I think the toughest part of the job is probably the emotional side, and just being there for clients, and certainly when things are out of your control, like an invasion of Ukraine, it's something you can't control. So you need to focus on the things you can control, which is how much you investing sensibly, and sticking to those good habits.
Yeah, it seems a little bit counterproductive if you are paying someone like yourself to give advice and then you don't follow them.
Yeah, and I think in most scenarios, someone who doesn't follow the advice doesn't end up paying for it. So a scenario might be that a client is with you, and a few years in, they decide they want to do something else and they leave. So they wouldn't be paying you after that point. But it does happen. A good example is if you look at stock markets from year 2000. So in the year 2000, stock markets were really high on the back of all the tech companies growing quite considerably in the late 90s. By 2003, stock markets had considerably dropped, and you could have been sitting on a 30, 40, 50% loss over that time. And to stick with investments during that time is very difficult. And a lot of people would have pulled their money out during that time and said, investing's not for me, it doesn't work. But if they were patient and they waited another 5 years, then they would have had a fantastic return. Then they would have been through the credit crisis and their investments would have dropped again. But then again, if they were patient, they would have had an amazing return for the next 10 years. So it is difficult. It's an emotional thing whenever you're dealing with money. To see your money going up and down is not easy. And that's why I think education at the start and understanding someone's risk is really important.
Yeah, definitely.
The number one thing when it comes to investing is if you could put money away and forget about it for 20 years and it's been well diversified, then you're going to have a really great return. There would have been loads of bumps along the road. And if you were looking at it every day, you probably would have stressed yourself out a million times. But patience is absolutely key. And that old buy and hold strategy, which so many great investors have deployed over the years, definitely pays off, and compound interest then really starts to work. And I would also add that, we talked about players needing to make good decisions from a young age. They also have a fantastic opportunity, because if you're a well-paid young athlete, you can get a lot of money invested from a really young age, and then you've got a long time for it to grow. Whereas most of us start off on very measly salaries, and it's only when we get to maybe our 30s, 40s and 50s where we have disposable income to invest. So there is also great opportunity out there if people make those good decisions.
Definitely. And patience, as you said, and you mentioned Warren Buffett. I think it was he that said that everyone wants to get rich fast. I think he got asked why no one is following his advice. And he said because he made his wealth obviously over like 40 years time. And people don't have that type of patience usually.
Yeah, well, the great facts, that's absolutely true. And one of the great facts about Warren Buffett is he's worth 103 billion today, roughly, maybe a bit less given the volatility. But he started investing when he was 11 with $40. And out of that 101 billion, 97 billion of it has been accumulated after his 65th birthday. So he was worth 4 billion at 65, which, don't get me wrong, is still amazing. But he's made 97 billion since then. So so he had started investing at 11 to 65. Most of us don't even invest that long. He's invested for, 70 years almost.
Yeah, that's amazing. Approaching the end here, is there something that I haven't asked you yet that you feel is important to mention?
I think one of the most important, or one of the most important concepts that we talk about all the time with athletes is building that plan. So building a plan, it sounds very simple, but it involves lots of different things. So what we would do with an athlete is we would look at what they're earning. We would look at what their career span looks like. We would look at what property they want to buy, whether they're going to have kids, whether they're going to get married, how much income they're going to need when they stop playing, whether they'd have another career. And we build a whole plan around it using some quite complex or sophisticated software. Now, the thing is with any plan is that it's never going to work out as you planned it. That's the one certainty really, is that there'll be variables in there and there'll be things that come along that we weren't expecting. So build a plan, continue to monitor it with someone you trust, continue to sit down regularly, at least a couple of times a year, to make sure you're still doing the right things and it's still suitable to the world today. And that is a really empowering thing for these athletes because it gives them clarity. It means they have less uncertainty about money because they know they're working towards something. And ultimately that means they can hopefully get on and have a better career without the burden of worrying about money and financial stress and anxiety and all those things that so many of us have. So I think building the plan is probably the most important thing we can do for athletes, but it's not easy, and it requires a lot of investment of time from them and obviously money as well.
And that's where you come in, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I think the real value add is, as well as I mentioned it, but making athletes think. So making them think that they will stop playing and competing at some point in the future. This doesn't last forever. And I know if I go back to when I was 20 years old and starting out in the workforce, you do feel invincible. You feel like you're going to be earning forever and it's only going to get more and more and more. And, sometimes a bit of fear is helpful because it motivates people to make some sensible decisions. And again, I'm not saying this is easy. I've dealt with lots of athletes down the years where it's just really difficult to get these messages across. And ultimately, sometimes people don't want to listen and that they think they know best. And maybe they do, maybe sometimes it works out. But a lot of the time it involves people investing in one or two things, which obviously then means it's much higher risk, and it can lead to these outcomes that aren't particularly favorable. So yeah, I think having a plan, working with someone you can trust is really important for these guys.
For sure. Before we sign off here, the last question that I ask everyone is, if you could choose the next guest on this podcast, so someone from the world of sports, who would you pick? Well,
I'm a massive golf fan, so I'd love you to have Tiger Woods on. If you can get him on the show. Give his people a ring. I'm sure he's scratching around for things to do. But I would love to hear him talk just about the journey of being a golfer and almost some of for my own curiosity, just what his money journey was like. Who was around him. I know quite a bit about his career and the agents he had and all those sorts of things, but just a bit about what it was like earning those mega contracts and all those different sponsorship deals that you have with Nike and all these other brands down the years, and the pressure that brings, the pressure on time and being dragged from pillar to post, how that affected his sport. I'm an absolute sucker for all those things. I think I'm very interested, and I don't think it gets reported a lot, of how real life things affect athletes. I think the Drive to Survive thing has been really interesting on Netflix. Yeah. They're doing something similar on golf, which will probably be really interesting. I think those insights into athletes' lives away from sport is fascinating.
Definitely. I think we will see much more of these type of documentaries like Drive to Survive. I know that the ATP tour, tennis tour, will do one. Mixed martial arts was early, and that was pivotal for them to grow their business. And I'm sure there will be, one on golf and other sports as well.
The golf one's being made at the moment.
It's being made now. Oh, I missed that. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's being filmed this year, so it should air next year. And again, I Drive to Survive was fascinating. I think just that insight into behind the scenes is something we all crave, right, as sports fans.
Yeah, that's a great one. Ben Smith, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sports Management podcast and sharing all of your expertise on investing for athletes.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.